Hmm. Hi, love. It's been a little while since I've hopped on my YouTube channel, and at some point, I'm sure I'll use this in the podcast as well. But I wanted to deepen a conversation around self holding. So, really learning how to hold yourself and how to be held. And within this conversation, we're going to touch on trauma and triggers and really how we get to support ourselves and anchor our inner safety as we are meeting a triggering event or something that feels really challenging. And some of you may know this, and many of you may not know this, but my clinical background is an occupational therapist. And for 10 years, I worked mostly with children and also their families. Most of my caseload was very complex trauma. So, a lot of my studies and my passion has really been in, body based nervous system work and resiliency and flexibility, and also the psychology of trauma and how we get to support ourselves through really hard things and how we get to create more flexibility and resiliency in our nervous systems. And that's why a big part of my practice and the work that I do with my clients today is trauma informed. And we really explore a lot of somatic experiencing to help, again, create this regulation and really transform our different traumas and triggers into a more integrated experience so that we can meet and respond to the world in a radically different way. So, I'm so grateful that you're here in this conversation. This has been a really big conversation that's been coming up. I feel, just in the collective, but especially with my clients and also with myself. I am in a constant practicing of learning how to hold myself and being held in deeper ways. So I'm hoping that, again, this discussion here is going to support you in doing just that. So, before we dive into the process that I like to explore with my clients when they're moving through a challenging trigger, I want to just identify and talk about, what trauma actually is, because trauma has become like a really buzzy word and it's really come alive, in the field, in the coaching industry, and, of course, in the health, wellness space, and as it should, because we do get to learn how to meet ourselves in deeper ways and really transform, again, a lot of these hurts, a lot of our wounds into deep wisdom and really as a way to cultivate deeper compassion and love and grace to ourselves. So, trauma itself is the unique individual experience of an event, a series of events, or a set of enduring conditions in which the individual's ability to integrate his or her emotional experience is overwhelmed, or the individual subjectively experiences a threat to life, bodily integrity, or sanity. So, again, trauma itself is a really subjective experience. And I like to think of it, Kimberly Ann Johnson uses this analogy, but I really love it. It's like, say you get this huge piece of cake and the cake comes full in, all into your mouth, and your body does not know how to process and digest and assimilate the cake or the experience or the event or that enduring set of conditions that's coming at you, essentially without any of your control. So your body has a hard time processing what is happening. And this is why, those individuals that have experienced trauma, and we all have experienced trauma on some level in our life, the trauma then presents as a set of symptoms instead of memories. So that's often why we don't always remember maybe what the experience was or what the event was or even what those enduring conditions were, but our body remembers it, right? Because it's stored more in that unconscious, subconscious part of the brain, more in your limbic system, in the brainstem, in the cerebellum, which is more connected to your autonomic nervous system. And this is where these deeper memories are stored. So we might not always know what the memory specifically was or what the event specifically was, but the body remembers because the body was the one that had a hard time processing and digesting and assimilating it. And this is why, later in our life where we might meet something that is triggering. So we might meet another event or experience that's, different than whatever that memory was in the past, but it elicits a similar response because the body is then beginning to interpret that event as the past traumatic memory. So this is why we do meet triggers. And this is why sometimes, something small that might happen in our current life and environment elicits like a really big response and reaction because your body is seeing the current event as a threat, right? As something that is triggering this deeper, more embedded memory experience event from the past trauma. So it's really now our responsibility to be in our bodies, to become more aware of, what is happening within ourselves and in our fields that we can integrate and really use the trauma or the trigger that we're now meeting as a teacher. And so that we can really integrate all of this into a new experience to birth a new way of being and to really reshape the current story and perception that's happening and arising from that past event. So, what's happening when we are triggered in our environment is essentially your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain, which is your insight and your executive and cognitive functioning, is shutting down and decreasing. And the back of your brain, the more, again, unconscious, subconscious reptilian part of the brain, which is where the cerebellum and the brain stem, and then the more mammalian part of the brain, which is where your amygdala and your limbic system is housed, which stores all of your emotional memories. This part of the brain is being turned up. So, front of the brain turning down, where you have insight and executive functioning and more regulation, in the back of the brain, which is where more of these stored implicit memories and your autonomic nervous system is housed, is being turned up. So this is why when we meet a trigger, we are going often into a state of fight or flight, right? The sympathetic system is increasing and the parasympathetic system, which is more of your rest and digest, is decreasing, right? So we have like cortisol happening and adrenaline going on when we're meeting a trigger. And this is why the body gets really reactive and we lose insight. And we're then responding again from that more primal part of our system, which is connected to our survival. So, again, when we're learning how to hold ourselves, we're really invited into a deeper devotional descent into our body, into our heart, and into our womb to really practice presence and curiosity and to eventually cultivate deeper love and compassion and grace. So when we are meeting a triggering moment or event, it's really, really important that we are recognizing what is happening in our body as that's beginning to erupt in our system, and then to give ourselves space. And I highly, highly, highly recommend working with a skilled practitioner, a therapist, a trauma-informed counselor to work with you if you are moving through, some deeply ingrained traumas and triggers in your system. I myself worked with a psychotherapist for, almost a decade. And I've also worked with a somatic therapist for now a couple of years. And I'm always deepening my learning within this realm so that I can, help myself as I'm meeting my own life. And of course, this is something that I facilitate as well with clients. But if you are meeting, really, really strong reactive states in the body, that's a really good indicator that it might be time to work with someone who can really support you in the process of the integration and essentially, your regulation and resiliency again in your nervous system. So that's just my disclaimer to, seek support if you are feeling like, wow, I am having a hard time, integrating and being less reactive, or I'm noticing that I'm freezing all the time and I'm unable to, move beyond, a certain moment when I am meeting a trigger or something that kind of, elicits that state in my body that's remembering, a past memory. And now it's hard for me to go forward or create something that I want to do in my life because I'm in this freeze response. I can't quite literally, move out of this discomfort that's happening. So When we are triggered, it's naturally more challenging to stay anchored in our inner safety and rooted in the truth of who we are. So, this is why, too, it's really important to understand, who are you at baseline, right? Like when you know your baseline, what is going on in your body? How do you feel in your body? What sensations are present? How are you able to meet yourself and the world around you? For most of us at baseline, we would maybe say that we're, relatively calm and grounded, and we feel rooted and anchored in who we are. And we can meet, maybe things that are challenging with grace and without, letting things completely rock our boat and ruffle our feathers. So just knowing your baseline, like when you're not in, a triggered event, if you're just, in a really safe space and place in your life and in your body, what is happening in your system? What does that feel like? And, we get to understand that when a storm is arising from, a trigger, that the trigger itself may be activating deeper wounds of abandonment, rejection, betrayal, humiliation, and injustice. So, again, when you're being triggered, that back part of your brain, the amygdala, is pulling up this implicit past emotional memory that may be connected to a felt sense of abandonment, rejection, betrayal, loss, humiliation, hurt, injustice in some way, right? So, again, just really witnessing that and knowing that we can use the trigger as a teacher and allow it to really support us in our own divine integration. So, I really liken the process of moving through, again, a trigger or a challenge as like labor. Not that I've given birth quite yet in my life. I can't wait until I do one day. But to me, it just feels viscerally like a very similar sensation. So, when we are meeting a trigger, and again, this is where it's really tricky because we have to really discern, is this a trigger, or is this an actual threat, right? Is the event or current experience an actual threat to my system where my body might be signaling, danger? But often we're just meeting something that is triggering a past trauma. So we're being asked to create space to come into the body and to really kind of recalibrate what we're meeting in a deeper somatic way so that we can reshape our story and perception and essentially, offer some healing to these past wounds that are arising from the trigger itself. But it's natural that when we are triggered, that alarm system is getting turned on because, again, your executive functioning is going down, your more reptilian brain, the subconscious, the emotional center part of the brain, the autonomic nervous system is being turned up. So, your amygdala is where that alarm system is being held, is stored within those emotional memories. So, the first part of this when we're meeting something that triggers us is, and again, a trigger can be, let me even describe what triggers can be. A trigger could be, your partner says something that you don't like, or they act in a way that hurt you and, is kind of activating a deeper wound of, again, abandonment, rejection, betrayal, any one of those things. You could be triggered with your family. That's often where we're really triggered, right? Mom or dad says something or does or doesn't do something, in the way that we really wish that they would do, right? To help nurture us and care for us and make us feel seen. It could be online while you're scrolling the interwebs. That's often where a lot of people do get triggered and we pull ourselves into comparison and not enough, and I'm not worthy and I'll never measure up. All of that can really affect our psyche and really, trigger us into these deeper wounds that we've been holding and housing and carrying within our system. So, triggers can happen quite literally all the time. You meet them really every day in your life because you don't have control of the world around you and your environment, but you do have control of how you're meeting yourself and how you're being in your body and how you're, again, being regulated within your system. So when we first meet a trigger, often what happens is there's this felt sense of contraction, right? So like closing in on itself. And really in the contraction is when you're meeting the potency of the stimulus. So In the contraction, this is really offering you an opportunity to observe the sensations that are arising in the body. So, you might notice, oh, my chest just got tight, or there's a knot in my stomach, or my limbs are feeling, numb or tingling. I'm wanting to maybe run or shut down or fight back, just starting to witness like what is the felt sensation and perhaps even emotional energy that's beginning to arise in my system, right? Because again, when we're meeting a trigger, there's naturally going to be a charge somewhere, in our bodies. So just noticing what that is, again, tight and tense in my shoulders, tight or even collapsed across my chest, like someone punched me in the stomach, like just really noticing what is being activated in your body through sensation. I always say sensation is the language of the body, and sensation is giving you a lot of information. And we also get to remember that sensation itself, ebbs and flows, it rises and falls, just like our emotions and feelings, right? It's not a permanent state that we're in. So sometimes even just recognizing, like, okay, I feel tight in my chest, and just being with that, right? Breathing with it, knowing that this is going to pass. This is not a permanent state of being, but even just observing and putting some language to what's happening in the body can start to already move the energy and begin to shift it. So I'll go deeper into that in the next part. So also noticing the stories, the perceptions, and the fears that are being activated through the trigger, right? So again, I mentioned before, triggers and trauma really show up as a set of symptoms, not exactly clear memories, but the trigger itself might activate a deeper story or perception that you're holding. Often we know that something is connected to a past trauma when you are creating like a generalization around something, or like a more expanded perception around something. That could be like, I'm not enough, I'm never going to be good enough, I'm never going to measure up, or, all people like this act in this way. My partners never show up for me. I always feel alone, all of those things. So really noticing the story that's arising from the trigger, because that's often creating a perception. And again, that perception is connected to the deeper trauma that's stored in the body and in, again, that more amygdala limbic system part of your brain. And really not running from the body or fighting back, just truly being with what is. So this is where we get to notice when we're in a more activated state. That's usually your cue, again, to take some space. So to walk away, if you can, from the event that is happening. And if you can't do that, something that I do is, again, I stay in the body, I breathe with the sensational energy that's arising, and I tell my body, you are safe. You take a few breaths, and I will offer you deeper attention to this, a little bit later. Because of course, some triggers are happening through like smaller events. It might be happening at work, or, something where you're in a conversation. But again, I highly recommend taking space if you can, and just letting it be known, that you need some space from the event itself so that you can go into a deeper state of regulation with your body. So the contraction is when we're meeting all of that, becoming aware of sensation, witnessing the stories, the perceptions, and the fears that are arising. And again, staying with the body to the best of our ability through, being with our breath and just starting to get curious about what's happening. This is a really big way that we reshape, the trigger and the trauma is, again, not by making ourselves wrong or judging ourselves or making ourselves bad or whatever, even trying to fix, just truly being with what is and starting to get more curious about what is happening. So the dilation process is really the part in which we do that through this process. So dilation comes after the contraction, after we've, kind of met the stimulus and we're really in the activation and the potency of that. We then have an opportunity to dilate. So this is where we're widening the capacity to essentially stay in the body and being with what's present. So not judging, fixing, making yourself wrong, or even collapsing into victimhood, but really grounding with the earth. Again, something that's really powerful to do is to feel your feet against the earth, or if you're sitting in a chair, to really feel your seat in the chair itself, to push down into the earth. So, again, maybe lengthening up through your spine, starting to erect your posture, just bringing presence back into the body. Being with your breath. Again, the breath is one of the greatest tools and natural resources that we have. So, again, wherever the sensation is arising in the body, it can be really powerful to bring your breath into that place and really let the breath widen into the edges of where you're feeling the discomfort. So, again, if you were feeling a lot of tightness in the chest, can you bring the breath into that chest region and really let the breath widen out to where you feel the edges of the discomfort happening? And then maybe also noticing, this is slightly more advanced, to then notice, somewhere in the body that feels more open and perhaps a little bit lighter and less charged, and to bring your awareness and your breath there, right? So starting to expand beyond where you're feeling the really deep contracted sensation, and also recognizing the parts of the body that feel more open, and letting your presence and attention go to that place as well. Really orienting yourself to your environment. So often too, when we're getting triggered, it might be eliciting part of that implicit memory. And again, these memories that we have can be conscious or unconscious. Like, again, you're not always going to know and understand in the moment why you're being triggered. But often when we are getting triggered, we're starting to sometimes dissociate from the body and from our environment. So it's really important to, again, ground and orient back to your environment. Something that I like to do is I scan the room, and I really let my attention rest on 3 different objects in my space, just taking in their shape, the color, the image, and just letting my body receive those objects can ground me back into the environment. So visually scanning your space can be really powerful to bring you back into the present moment. Um, Sometimes, again, moving is really powerful. So starting to move the energy in the body. So starting to move, where you feel the sensational energy most alive and most charged. So for me, often if I'm triggered, it actually elicits some anger and frustration for me. So it's in my stomach. And I'll start moving that region of my body. And I might even make some sound. Sighing is really powerful. Just a like moving that energy through your system. You might do some sound, some ah, letting again some of this energy move, because the energy is connecting to different emotions that are beginning to erupt. And again, the more we just stuff and suppress and store down those emotions, the more they compound. So it's really, really important that we move that energy through our body. So again, taking time to be with the emotion that's arising, right? If you need to cry, if you need to punch a pillow, if you need to stomp, if you need to breathe and let out some sound, what does that look like for you to start to move that emotional energy through? And again, not judging the emotion or trying to fix it or trying to change it or making yourself wrong given what's coming up, just being with what is, because as we do that, we are creating more safety in the body to feel. And then also in the dilation, we're really asking the body, what do you need to feel more safe and supported? So for me, in this part of the process, often is a little bit of inner child work, because again, it's the younger part of you that is often holding and storing this deeper memory and this trauma that's now eliciting, your reaction in the current trigger that's happening. So really asking the body, what do you need to feel more safe? What do you need right now to feel more supported? And really listening to how your body responds to you. Your body might say, I need to take a walk. I need to breathe. I need a hug. I need a bath. I need to go outside. I need to be in nature. I need to play. I need to laugh. Whatever it is, you're honoring what that little part of you is telling you, and you're honoring what the body is needing in this moment to feel more safe, right? So this is like a huge process within the self-holding process itself, is really anchoring safety back into the body. This is where we're listening. And then through following through with whatever the body is telling you to do, this is how we're holding ourselves in deeper ways. And really, as we keep our hearts open and receptive to grace, this is where we do expand our capacity to be with, what's happening without trying to fix or control or change. This is really our time in which we're nurturing those hurt parts of ourselves, that we're tending to, the wounds, and we're really giving more care, right, to what feels heavy, what feels hard right now. So giving some love to those parts that need a little bit more nurturance. And then the last part of this process is the opening. So this is really taking responsibility for your emotions and holding the parts that need more love, nurturance, and compassion, and really also using forgiveness and grace as a way to cultivate more inner spaciousness. Forgiveness is such a powerful practice. I'll do another video just on forgiveness at some point, but forgiveness is a way in which we do create more spaciousness within ourselves, because when we're holding on and harboring a lot of resentment and anger and bitterness and, all of the things, we're actually not giving space for ourselves. We're staying really closed and really contracted and really in a state of constriction in which, our energy is not able to flow as effectively in our system. So forgiveness is a really powerful practice. The opening is also too where we're leaning, more deeply with God, and really through this whole process, remembering that God is with you. God has never left you. God is not judging you. God just yearns to be close to your heart, and God yearns to hold you and wrap you, is in his embrace and really with his grace to help you move through this current trigger and challenge and obstacle and the hard thing that you're meeting, right? God wants to partner with you, and God wants to co-create with you through this. So, that's why too, sometimes when we're really triggered, often what I do is I pray. I sometimes take a walk. I remove myself from the triggering event or situation or stimulus. I take a walk. I ground my feet to the earth, and I pray. Again, prayer to me is a conversation with God. It's really where you're opening and revealing and exposing your heart and, praying over your own healing and really asking for God's support and help and grace, as you're moving through this hard thing, and really asking God too, to reveal to you what gets to change, what gets to be, more deeply supported, so that there can be a reshaping of the perception in the story, because God is often going to go for the root, to really then fix and cultivate new fruit, right? It's not just like trimming off some dead branches. I find that God often goes right to the root of the problem when we're in it and beginning to ask for help, which can sometimes be really uncomfortable, because it might mean that we are in a longer season of, sometimes heaviness and hardship. But that often to me is an indicator that God is really working on the roots, right? Not just taking off the dead fruit. He's really getting to the root of the issue with me. And it's all up to me to be really open and receptive to his guidance and his plan and the destiny that he has for my life, and for me to trust and surrender in deeper ways. So this opening is really leaning into God. That divine support is always, always, always there for you. And just remembering that God itself is the greatest force and power of love. And we get to lean into that in any moment in our life, to remember how deeply loved and held and whole and chosen and cherished you are in God's frame, because God has never left you in any moment. And God just yearns for you to remember that. So being held and really then integrating the trigger and, discerning how to respond. So after you've moved through this process, especially through the dilation, your body is a bit more grounded through that. You've created a little bit more flexibility and resiliency in yourself. So this is where we're birthing now a new way of being. We're reshaping the story and perception into a renewed behavior. So again, many times through this journey and through this process, we're not going to do it perfectly, right? It's going to be messy. We're going to stumble. We're going to, trip over ourselves a little bit when we're moving through some challenging triggers. But as we stay in the body and we stay present and curious and we give ourselves some space, you are over time creating more flexibility and resiliency in your nervous system. And again, as you're using the trigger as a teacher and developing more awareness, you're ultimately really learning how to bring love where it hasn't gone before. Because a huge part of this process, again, is that compassion, is that forgiveness, is that nurturance, is that grace, and you're in love, right, to yourself, and also really receiving that from God. So again, highly recommend working with a skilled facilitator or a therapist if you're noticing, there is some really big things coming up in your life and you are really desiring, learning how to hold yourself in deeper ways. Again, I have inside of my space a couple of places in which we deepen the exploration of this. Our group program Held is starting on January 11th, and that's going to be a really supportive group space in which we're learning how to hold ourselves and how to be held. And we're moving through this process together. My one-on-one mentorship also is a really, really, really deep journey for the embodiment and integration of again, our inner flexibility and resiliency with our nervous system, and really the devotional descent into the body, the heart, and the womb, so that we can become more present and resource within ourselves, so that we can then meet our life and our relationships and our business and our calling in an even more expansive and radiant way. So, those are two ways you could deepen this with me. But beyond me, there's so many amazing people out there and facilitators and practitioners to really support you through this process. And again, I recommend receiving support. It's not always something that we're meant to do on our own, and support is so powerful to receive in our journey to help us with the deeper integration and embodiment of holding ourselves, and again, learning to be held. And again, the greatest supporter in this is going to be God, and just remembering that God is walking beside you and wants to hold this with you, and just wants you to remember that you don't have to do any of this on your own. So wherever you are in your journey, I am deeply seeing you. I am truly walking right beside you. And I hope that this provided a little bit of context and a resource for you and your own process and deepening of self-holding and being held. And I'll be sharing some more resources here and on the podcast in which we'll dive deeper into these topics. But I'm just sending you so much love. And I just am so, so celebrating and honoring you and really deepening your own process and really your own devotional dissension that you are committed to. So I will see you next time. And yeah, just share with me any reflections, insights, revelations that you've received from the podcast or from this video. I just love hearing from you. So never hesitate to reach out to me. And all of my links to contact me are, in my YouTube, and I'll try to write them below here.